Good morning and welcome to the first session of this term's Global Security Seminars organized by the Nearest Institute. Now, this term we open with Libya, that is a country that has been marked by conflict for the past 15 years after the fall of Muammar Gaddafi. It remains trapped in political fragmentation and turmoil, and in recent weeks we've also seen renewed clashes between rival militias around Tripoli, which really underscores how the situation remains extremely fluid and fragile. We have the security situation which is extremely volatile. And in the meantime, there are also competing foreign interests on the ground that are trying to shape the balance of power. With stalled elections, parallel governments, and deepening external interference, the question that confronts Libya is whether a genuine political settlement is still possible, or if the country is destined to remain in this kind of perpetual flux or perpetual transition. And to seek answers to this and other questions, we are joined this morning by a foremost expert on Libya and, of course, the wider region. Mohamed Eljarh is joining us this morning. We are delighted to be hosting Mr. Mohamed Eljarh, who is the co-founder of Libya Outlook. Like I said, he is the foremost expert, and I would also like to share his impeccable CV with you. So Mohamed Eljarh is a Libyan affairs and regional geopolitics expert. He was a managing partner at Libya Desk for 4 years before he took on his current role as the co-founder of Libya Outlook. He was also the regional manager for CRCM North Africa in Libya for over a decade. He has, of course, extensive research and think tank experience through his work and collaborations with internationally renowned think tanks such as the Atlantic Council, of course, the Washington Institute, the Danish Institute for International Studies, Stockholm International Peace and Research Institute, the Institute of Higher National Defense Studies in Paris, the National Defense University in the United States, the Royal Institute of International Affairs at Chatham House, and the Russian International Affairs Council. Eljarh is a member of the Libyan Expertise Forum for Peace and Development, an initiative by the Institute of Integrated Transitions. He was a member of the Multilateralism Working Group for the G20 Summit for the year 2020 that was hosted by Saudi Arabia. He combines this extensive experience with, of course, practice in policy and research consulting too. So he was also involved in the Libyan mission to the European Union, the United Kingdom Special Envoy to Libya, the United Nations Support Mission to Libya, and the Small Arms Survey, among others. Throughout his career, Mr. Eljarh published hundreds of analysis and comment articles and 2 book chapters, as well as authoring and co-authoring various in-depth think tank reports and policy briefs on the situation in Libya and the wider MENA region. He's also well known in the international media and has vast experience in this regard. His work appeared in the New York Times, the Foreign Policy Magazine, World Politics Review, and The National, among others. And he is a frequent commentator on Libyan affairs in national and international media too, including appearances on the CNN, the BBC, Sky News, ABC, Al Jazeera, Al Arabiya, and TRT or the TRT World, among others. He also currently hosts his own show on Libyan tech TV channels and is an invited guest expert at regional and international conferences on regional and international issues around the world. So we are extremely delighted to be hosting him this morning. Mr. Mohamed Eljarh, welcome to the show, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you very much, Dr. Mustafa, for the kind invitation and also for the kind and quite long introduction. So thank you very much for that. And it is my pleasure to be here with the Near East Institute and to engage with students and colleagues thinking about issues of conflict, statehood, and global security. So thank you very much for inviting me. And to go right into it, Libya today represents one of the longest running cases of post-uprising fragmentations in the world. It is neither a failed state or a functioning one. Instead, Libya sits in the very uncomfortable middle ground of hybrid, penetrated, and constantly contested political order. So my purpose today is not to offer optimism or despair, but rather realism, and to reflect on the on what has actually evolved in Libya or inside Libya since 2011. How domestic fragmentation and external interference have fused into a single dynamic. And also I will touch on what limited but real opportunities still exist for renewal in Libya. And for that, there is a simple guiding question for my talk today, which is, can a fractured state like Libya reclaim legitimacy and coherence without restarting from zero and without surrendering sovereignty to foreign actors? So since 2011, as you rightly pointed out, Dr. Mustafa, Libya's story has been one of unresolved transitions. The fall of Gaddafi dismantled the central authority in 2011, but did not replace it with a new social contract. Instead, we saw the rise of rival governments, shifting coalitions, and an economy run by networks rather than institutions. In global security terms, and as a student also of global security, this reality reflects what Barry Bozon and Oliver Weaver describe as a penetrated regional security subcomplex, where internal conflicts are sustained by strategic rivalries and also by rivalries among neighboring states and foreign states alike. Domestically, Libya has evolved into a hybrid political order. Governance is distributed among actors with claims to legitimacy, from cities to ethnic and tribal groups, to militias and technocrats and technocratic institutions. But fragmentation hasn't meant chaos everywhere. For example, over the last few years, in the East and in the South, the rise of the Libyan Arab armed forces created a measure of stability that many local communities, but also international observers agree has not been experienced in years prior. Now, it's important to be clear here. The Libyan Arab armed forces is not a perfect institution in any way, nor is it free from controversy. But it has, over time, developed a hierarchy, command structures and discipline, and also an operational capacity unmatched by other Libyan actors throughout the last decade. Basically, for me, given that this is an area of interest for me, this represents an attempt, however incomplete, to reimpose state functions in the security sphere where civilian state has collapsed. Whether one supports, obviously, or opposes the leadership of the Libyan Arab armed forces, that's Khalifa Haftar, I think it's analytically undeniable that the Libyan Arab armed forces evolution has shaped very important facets of Libya's current trajectory. And that is the internal balance of power has shifted. Relationships with external actors have developed in unprecedented ways, but also the prospects for potential national reunification has also been reshaped as a result of this rise. Libya's fragmentation has not become inseparable from foreign interference, as you rightly pointed so, Dr. Mustafa. The country has been turned into a laboratory of proxy politics, where local actors survive by aligning with foreign patrons. For example, Turkey's intervention in 2019-2020 was a decisive military exercise. But what happened is that it entrenched dependency and created long-term leverage over Western Libya, and by extension and consequence, in the Eastern Mediterranean region. The UAE and Egypt, on the other hand, for example, supported the Eastern forces and the Libyan Arab Armed Forces militarily because it was part of their broader strategy of countering Islamists in the region. And another example is obviously Russia's military intervention. And what's interesting about that intervention is that it introduced a new dimension there, which is the private military dimension to state competition, introducing a new dimension of insecurity, not just in Libya, but also across the Sahel and the wider African continent. I think this could be called hybrid sovereignty as far as Libya is concerned. Libya is formally a sovereign state or nation, but its coercive economic and coercive powers are constantly negotiated and renegotiated time and again, both amongst domestic but also foreign actors alike. In theoretical terms, this hybrid sovereignty challenges traditional Westphalian assumptions about nation state, but most importantly about state control. It echoes some post-colonial critiques, where there are arguments that interventions in the global south often reproduce dependency structures rather than actually resolve them. But I think what's interesting to note here is that Libyan actors, especially the Libyan Arab Armed Forces, given that it's an area of interest for me, have also learned to play this game quite strategically as well. The balance, they started to balance foreign ties and relationships. They diversify their partners, and they use external relationships to consolidate internal autonomy. In my view, that's a different kind of agency, if you like. But I think it's one that does not fit neatly in Western narratives that usually are shaped by victimhood and clientelism. In a sense, Libya has become a case study in the negotiation, but also renegotiation of sovereignty rather than the loss of sovereignty itself. Renewal in the Libyan context is not about returning to pre-2011 model or have externally imposed blueprints. I think it's about building upon the functional realities that already exist in Libya today. Libya's legitimacy crisis runs deeper than just elections or stalled dialogues by the United Nations. I believe it stems from profound rupture of trust between the citizens, the Libyan population, and the political processes that are meant to restore this legitimacy, be those that are done by political elites in Libya or be it those that are led by the United Nations. As David Eston's idea of diffuse support reminds us, stability depends not only on institutions, but they depend on the people's belief or the population's belief that the process will be fair and that it can deliver on their aspirations and needs, even when the outcomes of that process are disappointing or not of preference. And I guess in Libya today, rebuilding this belief demands 3 locally ground steps. And the first one being a genuine reconciliation from the ground up, a process that must engage all the traditional, if you like, actors and those that hold real sway and real power in Libya today, be it tribal leaders, local leaders, military actors, so that the reconciliation can actually reflect realities rather than social realities in Libya rather than foreign blueprints. The other one is transparent and accountable economic governance. And this brings to question Libya's vast oil revenues and oil reserves, which must serve citizens. That is the change that needs to happen in that area, linking national wealth in Libya to services, but also to equitable development for the future. And the third one is a national dialogue rooted in local communities. Legitimacy cannot be built by foreign capitals or dialogues in foreign capitals. It must emerge from inclusive conversations within Libya's towns, within Libya's municipalities, within Libya's social structures and institutions as well, no matter how weak or imperfect they are, where ownership and trust can actually take root. Institutional reform in this regard should focus more on the function, not the form. Re-establishing credible security institutions is the foundation, in my view, for any political process or functional governance to appear or to succeed in Libya. In this regard, for example, such efforts as the Libyan Armed Forces Vision 2030 that recently was announced by the General Commander of the Armed Forces, which obviously the stated intention of it is to modernize command structures, to standardize training, to balance foreign relations. It illustrates to me an attempt to institutionalize authority within an otherwise personality-driven security order established by the General Commander Khalifa Haftar in this case, while still deeply political and uneven. These initiatives, I think, when you look deep down, show that even hybrid actors such as the Libyan Arab Armed Forces are aware of the need to project bureaucratic legitimacy and show that there is this concern and thinking about continuity. Obviously, let me be clear here that this does not mean that militarization is the answer. Absolutely not. It means acknowledging that security provision precedes political stability, as the previous years have shown. The state cannot be rebuilt by institutions that do not exist on the ground. The international community needs to move beyond managing crises towards enabling sovereignty. For example, the Berlin process that was launched in 2020, other UN tracks, including the current one that is happening and being led by the United Nations Support Mission to Libya, usually seek to freeze the conflict at the elite level without addressing the process society trust gap that I talked about. A more effective approach, in my view, should be an approach to support or an intervention to support sovereignty, i.e. external assistance and support and dialogues and processes should strengthen Libyan institutions and Libyan agency, even if imperfect or not ideal, rather than substituting for them and imposing blueprints that would not work on the ground. Sometimes I say the United Nations tries to impose liberal blueprints on illiberal realities that exist in Libya. And I guess, for the sake of the academic, if you like, debates and discussions, I guess it's very good for me to touch on how Libya's trajectory intersects with several major debates in global security and international relations. For example, when we talk about realism, I think realism remains essential as far as Libya is concerned, because what drives behavior in Libya today, be it of local or foreign actors, and the interventions around these, they are driven by power, they are driven by survival, they are driven by strategic interest, not norms, The norms are usually, in some cases, completely disregarded, even by the United Nations itself. Liberal internationalism as a framework or as a theory as well, however, played a defining role in Libya in Libya's collapse in 2011. And I usually bring this up whenever I am in such a setting or in a discussion that revolves around it. In 2011, NATO's intervention was framed under the responsibility to protect doctrine. Yet the idea of this doctrine is that the sovereignty entails the responsibility to protect or shield citizens against mass atrocities, of which Gaddafi was being accused at the time. Yet the Libyan case has become the most cited example of how the right to protect or R2P, when militarized without a coherent post-war strategy, can cause great damage and great insecurity to the very population and to the very people it aimed to protect. Now, the principle's failure in Libya has damaged its credibility globally. And this has deepened even further the north-south, if you like, mistrust, and reinforcing the perceptions that we have in this part of the world, in the global south, that humanitarian interventions often mask regime change missions. So in effect, the responsibility to protect episode transformed Libya from a testing ground for liberal norms into a case study of how norm fatigue, if you like, or disillusionment with intervention. And then I think another important framework or theory that applies in Libya, both again domestically, but also in the way that foreign actors intervene in Libya, is constructivism. And it reminds us in this case that Libya's fragmentation is also about competing identities. Within Libya, it is a narrative about a competing narrative between Islamist/revolutionary legitimacy versus military legitimacy. It is about Tripoli versus Benghazi and tribe versus technocratic institutions or technocracy, and so on and so forth. So Libya thus forces us to rethink both, in this case, the moral limits and the strategic consequences of intervention. It also challenges the assumptions that international protection, if you like, or international intervention produces local legitimacy or stability. Now, to conclude, reconciling a fractured Libya will require realism, definitely, and not romanticism. It means engaging with the power structures that exist on the ground today, not the institutions being imagined in peace conferences and foreign blueprints of sorts. And I would say among these, the Libyan Arab Armed Forces has become both, given that this is an area of study and reflection for me, the Libyan Arab Armed Forces has become both a reflection of Libya's enduring disorder and one of the few forces capable of imposing measure of order on the ground. Its emergence was not the product of design, but it was the product of necessity in this case. Why? Because it filled a vacuum of political paralysis that ensued after the fall of Gaddafi and institutional decay that followed. But most importantly, it's also of the failure of an international intervention under the pretext of the right to protect. Obviously, it remains contested and imperfect, but yet the Libyan Arab Armed Forces has demonstrated a capacity to enforce stability where formal and preferred governance models have failed. The challenge now is not to erase the hybrid arrangements that exist in Libya today. The challenge is to reshape them, to turn them to turn these structures that were born out of conflict, failed transitions, and so on and so forth, to turn them into, if you like, structures, or turn them into processes or arrangements that can serve a national purpose. That requires gradual professionalization, accountability to the population, to the Libyan people and their aspirations. And above all, I think it requires a unifying vision. It requires a unifying vision of what the Libyan state should be, both within Libya itself, but also in its neighboring, in its neighborhood. So, to conclude with the final note, I think Libya's experience underscores the hard truth, one of the hard truths about global security is that legitimacy often grows from imperfect foundations, and stability rarely comes from a purity of design, as usually you would find in United Nations blueprints or foreign blueprints. I think legitimacy emerges through adaptation, compromise, and the very, very difficult work of building order in the ruins of sovereignty that exists in Libya today. Thank you very much, Dr. Mustafa, and over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Mohammed. That was a fascinating overview, and you've touched upon several key issues that really underpin the situation on the ground. And I will be picking on some of those that you've touched upon, so that you can perhaps expand on them a little bit more. And in the meantime, we'll also be taking some questions from our audience. So the members of the audience, if you do have any questions or perhaps comments, feel free to share them with us over on YouTube, or if you're watching us on Facebook. Now, stability, legitimacy, sovereignty, these are, of course, the big questions that have some overlaps, but in cases like Libya, we have to unpack them to really make sure that we mean the same thing, right? And in this case, I want to start with this idea of reconciliation, which you touched upon. You first said, and I agree, that there are limits to externally sponsored interventions and blueprints, right? That I agree, and we will, of course, be touching upon that and discussing that. There's also the other point about engaging with the existing power structures. That, of course, is a textbook suggestion that applies to conflicts everywhere, really, right? But what would what you hinted at, this bottom-up approach to reconciliation look like? Because we don't really hear much, and you may be telling me that, well, that is a Western aspired framework, but we do not really hear the grassroots, the local communities, the tribes. How do they feature in all this? Because yes, the external or the international community engaging with the structures brings about legitimacy, right, to the governing structures, but it shouldn't stop there, because if it does, that is still an elite-driven reconciliation process that still has the usual shortcomings, wouldn't it? So my question really is, if you'd like to tell us a little bit more, if there are any of these, or how it trickles down to the local level, and whether there are agency or agencies from the local level upwards to shape and drive this process of reconciliation? Let's start with that, and then we continue with some other questions. Thank you.
يعني such a challenging but also such a pertinent area. But let me give you an example from on the ground. Benghazi, the city where I am, and a number of eastern Libyan municipalities were supposed to have, for example, local elections, municipal elections, few months ago. Security actors here decided that the environment and the conditions were not good enough for an election to take place. It could backfire and it could create some unintended results. Having a competition, if you like, an environment like one that exists in Libya today could result in instability or some security incidents as far as the security actors were concerned. So they stopped those elections. They requested from the higher National Election Commission to stop. What happened is civil society, those that wanted to run in the elections, tribes as well, who have an interest in having some sort of democratic legitimacy, and the higher National Elections Commission in Tripoli started this kind of dialogue behind the scenes. Okay, what's everyone's needs? What's everyone's concern? And let's try and address those. And this has happened with very minimal help from the United Nations. And the United Nations condemned. This is what they do. They say, we condemn the fact that elections didn't happen and so on and so forth. But a few months later, an agreement was reached that the elections take place, and they have already started in those municipalities where elections have stopped. And to me, it's very imperfect, by the way, because it raises the question of why should a security actor or the LNA decide when an election takes place or not? But the reality is that they are the ones on the ground. They are the ones controlling the security order, and they have a self-vested interest to ensure that there is no disturbance under whatever pretext to that order that they control, and also it represents their own survival, in a sense. But that did not stop the tribes, didn't stop those who were seeking to run in the elections, and also civil society organizations to negotiate for a few months amongst themselves, and then agree that there is a way forward and we can have this election. To me, obviously, that is about one particular file, if you like, maybe procedural, you could say, but it has implications in the way. It's imperfect. Some people would say, oh, but you're empowering the security actors because you're giving them this sway and power to have control over the process. Of course, in a perfect world, that should not be the approach. But the reality and the dynamics that exist on the ground necessitate that you deal with that dominant actor in order to hold something that is taken for granted in many other places, which is local elections and local legitimacy.
I think I'll come back to that, but there's a question. So it wouldn't be fair if I was the only one asking the questions, right? Although I'm sure we could probably continue into the small hours with you, Mr. Eljarh. But let's see, there's a question, and that is from our research assistant and the teaching associate here at Nearest Institute and the Nearest University Department of International Relations. That's Abdullah Al-Kathiri. Now, Abdullah is saying, what do this year's developments in Western and Eastern Libya reveal about the future of political alliances and statehood within the context of the existing hybrid sovereignty? I think it's a big question, right? Over to you.
It is not. It's not an easy one. What's interesting regarding the current developments and the roles of what is happening, if you like, as far as developments in Libya are concerned, is you have two kind of parallel processes right now. you have one that is being led by the United Nations mission, where they want to hold a new dialogue and have yet another unified government. For the international community and for many, this is the only game in town. But parallel to that, and as I said in my talk, that Libyan actors have perfected this game as well. They have learned, they're very rational actors. They have learned how to play the game. And they have their own, if you like, track of negotiations that are happening concerning if you like, the division of labor or the division of roles and what kind of files each side should take on. And there is now this competition between these two, if you like, processes that are unfolding on the ground. And to me, this is one of the fallacies, or if you like, one of the dysfunctions of the role of the United Nations, because the United Nations has a certain framework that they want to go with and work with, and it usually would clash with the Libyan way of doing things that could look messy or imperfect. This happened in 2022, by the way, when a number of Libyan actors in Tripoli, Misrata, the East, in Benghazi came together, and they decided that they wanted to have their own government that would replace the UN-appointed government of national unity. And the United Nations took the side of their government and called into question, on procedural, if you like, grounds, the legitimacy or the agency of that Libyan action. I would say it was the most concerted effort by a number of Libyan actors to come together and to try and truly unify under one government and in the split between Tripoli and Benghazi. The role of the United Nations in the process was like, well, the voting procedure within the House of Representatives was not democratic enough, was not perfect enough for the United Nations, despite the fact that the United Nations' own process was filled with rigging of vote, corruption. There was an investigation. Annex 13 was never, the results of that investigation in 2021 was never released to the public, and it was kept for whatever reasons. And to me, this kind of, if you like, competition between these two tracks or these two, if you like, levels and processes has been quite counterproductive. And I guess one of the key reasons for why we continue to be stuck. The United Nations doesn't take responsibility for what it's doing, because it's always the Libyans' fault. And then the Libyans will never take responsibility because it's always the international's fault. And that creates, if you like, a comfort zone for all of the actors, and it creates this this environment, this testing environment for ideas and processes and so on and so forth.
And that's a very interesting point that you make. I mean, I was hoping that I would avoid doing this and introducing a sort of a comparative angle. But the story you describe of UN involvement in Libya or UN activism, perhaps, in this case, is starkly different to the extent of involvement of the UN in other conflict settings. Take, for instance, in Cyprus, there is a much more contained involvement of the UN. So what's driving this activism, which so clearly, as you suggest, lacks legitimacy and sometimes obscures or obstructs the perhaps the creative ways that are needed to overcome the division?
I mean, I think I'm going to upset a few people, but I usually do that with my also writing. But I talked about how the principle of the right to protect was misused in Libya. And it was indeed a tool for a number of nations to come in under the pretext of right to protect civilians against atrocities by Gaddafi, overthrow Gaddafi, and then say, okay, mission accomplished, and we don't care what happens after that, despite the fact that more people have died, more insecurity has ensued, and so on and so forth after that. The United Nations is yet another element of how this international system gets used. The paralysis and the dysfunction of the United Nations support mission in Libya is a reflection of the strategic rivalry that exists amongst key nations, all of which participated in the overthrow of the Gaddafi regime, with the exception of Russia, that is. But Arab nations and Turkey and NATO countries have all participated in the overthrow of the Gaddafi regime. And then their own rivalry is one of the driving factors for why Libya continues to be stuck in this unending transition. So the activism of the United Nations in certain processes or areas is a reflection of the interest of some key and powerful states that the United Nations needs to work with in order to execute its role.
That's an interesting point, which I will come back to. But we have another question from Dr. Said Akshit, who is the head of international relations here at Nearest University. Now, he is saying, thank you for your insightful presentation. How should we evaluate Turkey's developing dialogue with different groups in Libya and the repercussions of that for the wider regional setting? I think that's a very, very valid question, very important one.
Mm-hmm. I think the role of Turkey, not just in Libya, but also the region, and this aspiration to become one of the hegemons, if you like, or a hegemon in the region, through the projection of both military but also economic power, is quite an interesting one. And I asked this particular specific question the last time we met to some of our Turkish colleagues at the Istanbul Security Conference, which is, a few years ago, Turkey was butchering the LNA forces in Tripoli. And today, there is a consulate of Turkey in Benghazi, where I am right now. Trade is booming. Turkish companies are securing major contracts in eastern and southern Libya. There is a developing military relationship as well. And that is such an interesting flip that happened within a short space of time, if you like, if you think about it. And I asked that question of how, to Turkish officials, how do they plan to use this, if you like, leverage that they have? I didn't get the answer I was looking for. I got more of a diplomatic answer at the time. But I think from a Libyan perspective, from my perspective, Turkey is a rational actor in an anarchic system. Turkey is looking for Turkey's interests and strategic ambitions. The question for me is the current status quo beneficial enough for Turkey, which seems to be the case, where Turkey wants to keep the situation in Tripoli as is, no flare-up in clashes. They have played a key role recently in negotiating settlement between the Dbeiba forces and anti-Dbeiba forces in Tripoli to keep a lid on things. And they have opened up quite significantly to Khalifa Haftar and to the Libyan Arab armed forces here, resulting in the East even thinking about recognizing the maritime deal. The question is then, will the Tripoli factions kind of expire in terms of how much they can give Turkey? And it's this strategic vision of the region and Libya's place in that. And will they come to a conclusion that the current status quo is no longer sustainable, and we would need to have a paradigm shift of sorts where the country gets unified one way or another, instead of keeping the status quo. Will their negotiations with the Libyan Arab Armed Forces and the House of Representatives here in Benghazi result in Turkey saying, okay, maybe we can help you come to Tripoli and have a role there in exchange for long-term security cooperation and the recognition of Turkey's claims to the Eastern Mediterranean and the maritime deal? That's a big question, but I guess it's one that the Turkish government, Turkish officials are grappling with at the moment. Do we continue with the status quo, even if it is unsustainable? Or do we be ahead of everyone else and try and hedge our bets in one direction or another and change the realities on the ground in a way that will sustain Turkey's interests for a long period of time into the future? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, you said that the Turkish officials were being diplomatic, although I think you are being a bit diplomatic as well here, right? In terms of the Libya maritime deal, what would you say that the position of the Libyan authorities and that of Haftar's position be? What is it ought to be? Asking to you as Mr. Mohamed Eljarh.
Okay. I mean,
I didn't mean to put you in a tight spot.
If I was advising Khalifa Haftar, I would say, okay, the Turks have called you. They want to talk about the maritime deal. Your questions should always be, what's in it for me? What are you going to do for me in return for this? Because why would Haftar anger Egypt or Greece or the European Union in its entirety for the sake of Turkey's claims? Unless Turkey can deliver something that the Egyptians and the Europeans cannot deliver. And that is advanced weapons, but also access to the capital, Tripoli. So this is, in my view, where the negotiation then happens. It is about the survival and the advancement of interest of Khalifa Haftar as the most coherent national force in Libya today, so that he could actually go one step further and then reunify the country, for example, under the authority of the institution that he heads or the faction that he heads, and establish a new order where Turkey is a strategic partner and ally for years to come.
Excellent. We have one more question. It was sent through Facebook that I just got on my phone. It's from a student. How do competing interests among international and regional states shape the prospects for long-term stability in Libya? And will these dynamics lead to genuine political reconciliation or perpetuate continued conflict and military stalemates? Perhaps some of these... Go on.
The voice was cutting a little bit.
Right. Okay. Let me try this again. Maybe slightly shorten it as well. How do rival interests among international and regional states shape the prospects for long-term stability in Libya? So this, I guess, hints at, what does Greece want? What does Italy want? And some of the international actors you've touched upon in the case of, you just did it by saying the members of the UN Security Council, but I think they're asking us to spell them out in more specific terms. It's up to you if you want to have a go at it.
Yes. No, I mean, I think the only way that these competing natural strategic foreign interests of various states that are interested in Libya can be managed and directed in a positive way is if there is a Libyan counterpart that is able to represent Libya's interest and then navigate and manage those competing rival interests of these various states. The challenge on us, on, let's say, the Libyan Arab Armed Forces or the government in Tripoli, is to position themselves in such a way where they can play this game as well. This game of interest. Okay, we have various interests. How do we prioritize them? And how do I turn this interest into something that can actually serve my vision, my interest of what Libya should be as a state? Currently, that actor or that situation is not possible because there isn't a fully coherent Libyan actor that can play that managing role. And what you end up with is this negotiated, renegotiated, and renegotiated again, the kind of rivalry interest. Sometimes Turkey is on top, other times it's the United States and the UK and the West, and other times it's Egypt, other times it's the UAE, and other times it's Qatar. But the absence of a true representative of Libya, which is what the Libyan Arab Armed Forces is trying to do now. They're trying to diversify and manage all of these relationships with the United States, with Russia, with Turkey, with Egypt, with the UAE. But unless we reach a point where it is coherent enough, I think it will be impossible to turn this negative interference into something that becomes natural and overall positive and just play the game like everyone else does in the world.
Excellent. Well, the next question, and I think it will be our last one, because I know that you have a very busy schedule, and I don't want to be taking away from that. But this is something that we are discussing more and more in class, more and more in the media, and we get asked this often. And of course, we are seeing some interesting dynamics that are sort of put in motion in different settings and theaters. And that is, of course, the Trump factor, right? Donald Trump. Now, he's claiming that he's helped resolve 8 conflicts so far. Very much debatable. There is talk here in Cyprus, still at sort of an embryonic level, but whether Trump will turn his attention onto the Eastern Mediterranean. Now, do you have that sort of a sense in Libya that Trump may soon decide for a change or a shift of attention, or perhaps more involvement in Libya? Is there that sort of an expectation there, or is there that sort of a concern there?
Number one, the United States does not have an ambassador and hasn't had an ambassador for some time in Libya. They have a charge. Number two, there are 2 competing tracks as far as the United States approach to Libya is concerned. There is the White House and then the State Department, apparently, and this is according to a recent report by Africa Intelligence, which is that you have the Mis'ad Bulus, the envoy to Africa, and then you have Steve Witkoff, the envoy to the Middle East. And it seems that both of them have their own channels and their own way of thinking about how to approach Libya. This tells you everything you need to know, that right now, Libya is not at the top or anywhere near the top of priorities as far as Trump's policy in the region is concerned. However, earlier this year, I wrote an article for Al-Monitor discussing what Trump 2.0 would mean for Libya. And I believe that we know that Trump is not going to be interested in elections or democracy or any of this as far as, or development as far as Libya is concerned. I think the key drivers for Trump's engagement with Libya will be, first, energy interests, the minerals, and so on and so forth, question and the interest of American companies in these areas. And then number two is the expansion of the Abraham Accords and whether Libya could be part of whatever new wave of normalization with Israel will be. I think these two will be the most important factors that Trump would have to think about when he engages with Libya or tries to impose peace, if you like, as far as Libya is concerned. But right now, it doesn't look like the United States has any real interest or priority in moving things. We have two channels working on Libya, Steve Witkoff from one side, but he's very busy with other files. And then you have Mis'ad Polis, but it seems that his own initiatives are now stirring the ire of Susie Wiles at the White House, according to some of the recent reports that we have seen.
Excellent. Mohamed Eljarh, it was a pleasure having you here on the first session of the Global Security Seminars. We've tried to tackle a challenging topic, one that involves so many moving parts and, like you said in your title, including external interference and plenty of it in a setting that is marked by rivalries, but also some clear structures that are there, bringing in a good measure of stability that the country needs, certainly a lot more. And right now, any final thoughts before I close the program, the show?
Thank you very much for the invitation, for the kind invitation. It has been a pleasure, and hopefully we'll do more of these in the future. Thank you very much for the invitation. It has been a pleasure.
Inshallah, the pleasure is ours. So for those of the members of the audience, thank you very much for joining us, and do make sure to follow us on the social media, on Facebook, on Twitter, and on LinkedIn to stay up to date with the upcoming events, talks, seminars, but also publications. Thank you, and we look forward to seeing you again at another session.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Eğer ki hayatımızda hiç eğer olmasaydı nasıl olurdu? Size şöyle söyleyeyim. Her şey daha az parlak, daha az yeşil olurdu ve daha az parlak yeşil. Çünkü eğerler ormanların derinliklerinde tek bir kibritle devrimlerin kıvılcımını ateşler. Eğerler Nobel ve Guggenheim'ın aklına takılır ve o kodu bu kodu çözerler. Eğerlerle içinizden haykırmak gelir. Eğerler bariyerleri kırarlar. Asla yalnız yürümezler ve aşırı bulaşıcıdırlar. Eğerler aşikardır ve son anda golü atarlar. Eğerler günü umursamazlar. Robotlarla bile konuşabilirler. Karşı takım soluklanırken oynamaya durmadan devam ederler. Sadece basit bir kelime, öyle mi? Hayır. Eğerler asla uyumazlar. Hep daha fazla çaba gösterirler. Eğerler bakar, araştırır ve en beklenmedik zamanda ortaya çıkarlar. Eğerler klonlanarak çoğalırlar. Acaba gerçekten yapabilir misin? Yaptın bile. Eğerler aklınıza girmeye çalışan güler yüzlü şakacılardır. Eğerler kapıları açarlar. Asla kaybetmeyeceklerini bilirler. Ve biraz gün ışığına her zaman hazırdırlar. Her şey bir eğerle başlar. Çünkü eğerler ne zaman dönüşür, ne zamanlarsa şimdi. Ve şimdi nasıla dönüşür. Nasılsa asıla. Eğerler bakış açınızı değiştirir. Eğerler oyunu değiştirir. Eğerler dünyayı değiştirir. Biliyoruz. Çünkü biz eğerlerle çalışıyoruz. Yakın Doğu Üniversitesi.